The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs.
Mary, I didn't tell you beforehand, but I have a special stick, okay? Thank you for sending me your bio, but I don't read it. I try to find stuff on the internet and then see
Oh,
if it's true during this intro, okay? And this is a Mary French. I don't know if it's you. There's a lot of Mary Frenches, unfortunately. So um, you just tell me
let's
yes
do
or
the
no.
test.
Mary
Yes,
French, amongst many things, is a principal consultant and team member at Lifecycle Engineering.
true.
Super excited. You're like proof I have a real job.
I can vouch for that.
Lean and process optimization expert, undergraduate in chemical engineering at Cleveland State University.
Yes.
Mary, it looks like you are a super volunteer at many organizations, such as those supporting children's causes, animal causes, and climate change. Is that correct?
It is. That's why I like the consulting world. I can own my schedule and try to give back.
PMP, Six Sigma Black Belt, Scrum Master, Certified Nice Person.
Thank you.
And this is something interesting I know about you because I know you, so I know this is true. And I share this with the rest of the participants. Mary is like a super athlete. Okay, I like to kind of parade like I can jog a little bit, but Mary is like a legit endurance athlete. And I think cycling is the main thing right now. And folks, I'm not talking cycling like 50 miles, 100 miles. That's lamer gamer. Okay. I'm talking 100, not 100, not 200. I think you did a 300-mile bike ride through Big Bend. That's like 12,000 feet of elevation up.
Yes.
That's nuts. That's crazy. God bless you.
That
And you are, I think, are you just about, or you're training or planning or doing some sort of fundraiser? You're going to do a 6-day fundraiser for charity?
Yes, climateride.org is a nonprofit for the environment. That's what the Big Bend ride was, and I have another one coming up for Glacier National Park next summer.
I'll be honest, I kind of like global warming because I'm cold all the time, but I don't like global cooling. So I'm pro your initiative. So I support what you're
Thank
doing.
you.
Keep it up. Mary, I am going to be quiet now and listen and learn, and then halfway through or so, stop and I'll hit you with some Q&A that I've received from the participants.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I, unlike Robert, do not love public speaking, but I do love lean. So this is a bit of a compromise to share my passion with you this morning. Now, I know that we have a mix in the audience, so we've set up the agenda today to go through some reminders. Basically, what is lean? What are the principles behind it? And what are the wastes that it strives to reduce? And then from there, we're going to move into some best practices, kind of what have we seen in different companies across industries, different levels of maturity, and what have we learned from that that we can share as takeaways that you can put to use immediately in your organizations. So we start with what is lean, and I begin by saying it's process improvement. So I know lean has been around for over 100 years, and you've probably all heard of it, you've probably all practiced it, you probably have very different opinions of it depending upon how it was facilitated, adopted, and kind of sustained within your organizations and various places you've worked. What I will say is lean is one of the simplest process improvement methodologies, and it's not really trying to do anything new. It's a very logical approach to pointing out opportunities and trying to make them better in baby steps. So you've probably heard the acronym for DMAIC, and this is what I show here on the left of the table. It runs you through the various phases of how we practice lean. It begins with a defined phase, which is your current state, some context and background for why are you looking at something. Moves into a measure phase, which also is current state, looking at where are we today and what is undesirable about this situation. And then it sets an objective from there for improvement, which moves you into the analyze phase to kind of test different theories for improvement. Once you set those conditions and have a significantly better state, you work through a control phase to sustain that condition. And then once you have a sustained condition, you start anew. So it looks like a discrete table, like a project has an endpoint. But the thing about this type of process improvement is it's continuous improvement. So I can't stress enough the C in CI. And that's why I compare it to a PDCA loop, which most of you probably know as a basic quality tool. If you've got a situation, it's common to approach it by planning your actions, taking that action, checking upon what that action has done for you, and then acting accordingly to either resume or proceed or correct the situation. You can even go further back in time to the original scientific method of hypothesis testing. You have an observation, you propose a relationship, you test that, and you either validate that or you prove that it's not true and you counter with a new observation. All of these are continuous improvement loops. And looking to the right, I put this here because I think it's really important to change the connotation around problems. We say we're doing process improvement to solve problems as if problems are negatives, but I would challenge you to really look at problems as opportunities and make them positive. If you do your thorough work through define and measure, really understanding why you have a problem and what the causes of it are, you will position yourself to really drive to your solution. There's a common analogy I like to say that if you follow children on how toddlers move and stretch and prepare and squat, it's important to squat before you jump so you don't hurt yourself. You know where you are, you know where you're going, and you position yourself. So I encourage this logical approach to problem solving, and I also like to turn it into a mathematical equation. For those of you like me, engineering backgrounds, math backgrounds, I always revert back to y is a function of x. So if y is your problem or your metric that you're trying to move, it's your problem, that's your opportunity, that's going to become your objective, there are a number of little x's that influence y. And the reason you go through a lean project is to understand which x's are significant, where they should be set to dial them in to give you your ideal y output. So you'll hear me come back to that big Y and little x's. And to come full circle, I just want to talk through some objectives, because when people talk about why do we practice lean, they're typically looking at it for a number of different reasons. But I will say that these objectives are shared. If you think of me as an engineering background, kind of a production operations person, my objectives don't differ from your view. In the financial world, you're managing corporate processes and hundreds of processes, and you're looking for the same inputs and the same directions that we're looking for. So I think it's important to point out that these areas are aligned across roles and across industries. And I want to drive this back with traditional project management, because I explained lean as a logical approach to problem solving, but it's important to go back to the traditional PMBOK guide of project management. If you look at the phases in project management, that initiation and planning, kind of setting your scope, getting your team, planning your arguments for why you're going to undertake a project endeavor, it's similar to the define and measure phase. Then you go into execution of your project. There's always monitoring and controlling through that, and a formal closing process. The difference in project management is that it's by definition temporary, right? You have an objective in the beginning, you meet that objective, you hopefully hold to that timeline and cost, you deliver that scope, and you're done. The difference in lean is that that future state, that end point of your project, then becomes your current state of your next project, and you never stop striving towards perfection. So if you look to the right of that table, kind of agile project management, that is actually more complementary to lean, because you don't always know your endpoint. In waterfall project management, you're typically working for an MVP, minimum viable design or product, and then you're refining that as you go. So you have a set of requirements, you design around that, do some development and testing that may be iterative, and then you deploy a segment or a portion of that, and then you continue to refine and add to it. So that's very similar to the lean approach to process improvement. The last point I want to highlight on this slide is, it goes against human nature, that again, you cannot put too much time on the front end of this process. It's common when you're teaching lean to folks who want to make things better that they initially want to jump to the middle of the project and start problem solving before they have a thorough understanding of the current state. So the reason I call this a logical approach is because it forces you to understand your starting point thoroughly so that the actions you take actually get to the root cause and solve the problem, not just band-aid it or temporarily polish it. It goes against human nature in the beginning, but the more you practice this, the more habit forming it becomes, and the easier it is to then analyze future problems correctly so that you save time long term and actually put solutions in place that resolve the root cause of the problem. So that covers process improvement. Let me jump back a little and go to a higher point. The reason I say this is because let's look at the big picture. We talked about process improvement using the DMAIC methodology, but why are we doing that? From a big picture, maturity of a corporation, why would a company be lean versus not? Comes back to these 5 principles, and these take years to put into place. So if you begin with the yellow circle, number 1, defining value, lean is set from the perspective of your customer. Your customer always comes first, and your customer defines what value is. The definition of that is what they're willing to pay for. So they set end requirements on a product or a service, and you work backwards to figure out how to deliver that. So your customer defines your value. Step 2 is you figuring out your value stream. And that is basically as if you were to map it in a process map. What are the steps, operations, decisions that I need to go through to deliver that product or service? Put those in as straight a line as possible. So basically connecting the dots and validating your scope of what is critical to deliver value and what is not. Step 3 is creating flow. So this is getting your layout, getting your sequencing, getting everything to work together as a unified operation along that horizontal value stream, which is very, very difficult in some companies because we're typically set up in vertical organizations. You have to break down those barriers and look at things from a horizontal perspective. Many companies will spend 3, 4, 5 years just getting those first 3 principles in order. It's the mature organizations then that can get to step 4, which is establishing pull. This is where you're getting into balancing. So you know what you're trying to deliver, you know the requirements that define it, you understand the operations you can take and the different technology you can use to do that. You've laid it out in a way that you believe is as efficient as possible. However, now you want everything to work in unison. So it's reducing those batch sizes, it's reducing cycle times, it's eliminating lags, it's understanding supermarkets and pools so that one operation is pulling from the one prior. You're not producing anything until there's a need downstream. So there's no waiting, no inventory, none of those other ways in between. Pull is, like I say, a mature organization, but so powerful and such a huge time and cost savings. It's really worth striving to. And I'm not saying you don't get there in your first few years, but you'll get there in pockets. You won't get there across your full organization because there's so much to connect. Once you get to that point, you're constantly looking for your next constraint. So the pursuit perfection is, again, reinforcing the C in CI. You're always looking for more. What you accomplished in one project becomes your starting point for your next project. Once you remove one bottleneck, you will identify the next. It's basically the theory of constraints over and over and over. And not to make that sound tireless, because it's not just an endless loop, I wanted to bring back the analogy of a staircase. This is one of my favorite photos in the world of lean because it forces you to stay in that high picture, look across your horizontal supply chain, and think about what you're doing long term. Imagine each one of those steps in that staircase is a project in and of itself in a lean way that build together incrementally. So you have a long-term vision, but you're taking baby steps. And that's why lean is so easy to adopt. It's simple, it's small, you're not making these huge steps and overwhelming your people or your equipment. You're really making small changes that are directionally aligned to get you to a future state. And when I say that you're always looking for the next constraint, keep in mind that you don't know what those are beyond the current moment, right? Conditions are always changing. You may have the most ideal process in place, that is competitive in your marketplace, but something in the environment changes. Something from your competition matures and you need to advance. In today's world, supply chain constraints are going to rethink how you envisioned your inventory needs of yesterday. So there's always need for change. If you're not changing, then you're not keeping up and staying competitive. So I love this staircase because it really doesn't have to end, but it doesn't have to overwhelm either. With each project you do, you step up that small improvement, you catch your breath on that platform, right? Check out that view, get used to that norm, build those behaviors that becomes your habit, and then take another advancement, and so on and so on. So let's go back to waste. We talked about lean being process improvement, defining value as principle number one through the eyes of the customer. And we said value is what you're willing to pay for. So anything that is not value from the customer perspective is what we call waste. And waste, like a problem in our world, has a very negative connotation. The one takeaway that will be most powerful for you from this meeting, if you haven't already, is to convert that to a positive. Learning to see waste is an enormous skill set. And if you can build this in your organizations and make it a positive thing, you will benefit in folds. Identifying which category of waste is not as important as understanding the difference between waste and value, but using these categories does allow you to find it easier. So once you see it, you can highlight it, you can talk about it, and you can work together to resolve it. When we talk about waste in a process, I don't want you to think that if your process has waste, something is wrong or you're, not at a state that you should be. A traditional process has 97% waste. So that number should shock you, but it's normal, right? There's so much waste that is required waste or, compliance government imposed waste, and there's so much waste inherent in the way we design, build, and operate. So I'm going to go through each of these in detail so you can understand them a little better. But before I do that, I want to point out that these pictures are probably steering you to a factory mindset, right? You see the truck, you see the smokestack. I don't want to limit your view of this topic because this is the most important fundament of lean. I want you to think of this in terms of information flow in addition to material flow. So lean did start with, Toyota production system, and it was mainly for factory settings, operational production environments. The skill set is transferable across industries, and it is really powerful in office settings. The more we use technology, the more we work remotely, the more we work internationally, the more critical it is for us to cut down the waste in that information flow in transactional settings, administrative settings, corporate offices. Those are the areas that can benefit significantly from this work. So as we go through these, think about information flow in your world. So I'm going to start with motion and transportation because these two are closely related. We could term motion as any waste from an employee. So this could be you walking around looking for materials. This could be searching for files or information in different, systems on your computer or apps. It could be chasing information that you don't have purview to or access to. We also talk about this in terms of squatting, reaching, bending. In a perfect lean world, and I'll say this a lot, perfect lean world because that's the state we aspire to always, but never achieve. That's perfection. In a perfect world, if you glued your elbows to your waist and could not move beyond that point, you would still be able to perform your job to its necessary level without any problems. Imagine everything being within reach like that, all the information, all the materials, everything you need. Now, obviously, you're not going to get to that point, but you're trying to reduce that. You would be surprised if you actually reported everything for your day and saw how much walking, searching, chasing, leaving your workstation, things like that are done just because you don't have the materials and information you need to finish a task start to finish. Comparably, transportation is a similar waste, but it's equipment and parts. So it could be your raw materials, could be work in process, could be finished good. In the case of information flow, think about decisions and approvals. Where's that information going? Do you get all the information you need to make a decision and take the next action? Or are you usually consulting and waiting for approvals or gates or different workflows that hold up that information flow? And typically these go hand in hand. If the information is stopped or the material is stopped, then the person associated with that is typically stopped as well. So let me move on to the next two. These two get confused, and again, it's not as important to categorize your waste as it is to identify, but let me start with overprocessing. So going back to the principles, we defined value from the eyes of the customers, and we identified our value stream. So in doing that, we tried to put together the sequence of operations necessary to produce that service or product. Anything outside of that is unnecessary. So if you are taking additional steps beyond the quality or requirements of what the customer wanted, that's overprocessing. I know you're traditionally going to think, well, we never do that, but think about how you assign your work. Do you really know which department, which role, which resource is supposed to do a task? Or sometimes is that left vague and no one's assigned, and then you might have a gap, or you might have two people working on the same things. Or think about information flow as a data field in a computer system. Are you typing that in, or can you integrate and have that automate and populate on its own? Are you entering it into a single system, or are there multiple systems that currently don't communicate? Are you supplying information? Maybe there's a contract that needs to be open for a new customer, and you're sending them all the information that came with that customer profile. Well, they might need 5 of those fields and you just gave them 15. So the time that you took to report that was overprocessing, and the time that they took to have to filter out what they need versus what they received is overprocessing. If we flip gears and look at overproduction, that means you had to do that step, but you did it at the wrong time, or you did too much of it. So it's too soon or too much. So in this, if we're sticking to information flow, think about your reporting. Are you sending reports on a monthly basis? Are you sending them to everyone in a certain department? Is it information instead of action? So think about anything that's on a frequency, that's typically overproduction. Anything that's going out to a mass audience, that's typically overproduction. Anything that's building inventory. And by inventory, don't think about a warehouse and pallets of goods. Think about files, think about emails, think about servers and backups. You have inventory in many forms other than material forms. And if I move along, these three are a little easier to understand. That's why I save them for last, but they're also the most common and the most expensive. So if we talk about defects, the reason these are the most expensive is because they require rework. Anything that starts with re is a problem, right? Return, repeat, redo, rework. Any re's need to be minimized. Typically, these are coming late in your process, which means you've already invested materials, time, labor. Gets very expensive even if you can rework, let alone when you have to scrap. So the better your designs, the better your operations, the better your communication, the better your information flow to eliminate these from happening. The more you can automate instead of type, things like that, you can significantly reduce defects across your value stream. Waiting sounds like it never happens, but this honestly is one of the most common. If you talk about the others, pretty much anytime you have one of the other types of waste, you have waiting involved in it as well. So we talk about empowering everyone to have the skill set to own their work environment and complete their tasks start to finish. That's very hard to do when you're working checks and balances in. So you really want to look if you're providing the right information to thoroughly complete a task. Try to minimize how many consults you need, how many approvals you need, any direction midstream. These should all be owned by the person doing the work so that they don't wait on any of these items. And I know I already mentioned on the inventory the different aspects of that, but I challenge you, don't think about a warehouse. Think about your desk, think about your computer, think about your computer rooms and servers and backups. The more you can get to single piece flow away from batches, touching something once and having it go from start to finish, even if it is a piece of paper or a file or an email, one touch is always quicker to work start to finish. Okay, so in the agenda, I don't know if anyone noticed, I said 8 deadly waste. And the typical photo you saw, the analogy of the acronym from Tim Wood, if you've heard that, is 7 waste. That's where Lean started. But over the past 20 years, this 8th waste here of underutilized resources is becoming more and more popular. And I cannot underestimate this in today's world. We talk about underutilized resources being both equipment and people. So have you used your equipment for all of its purposes with maximum uptime? Can it do 3 things and you're only using it to do 1? Or does it sit 60% of the time as opposed to run multiple shifts, multiple days? So leverage your equipment as much as possible, but don't underestimate your employees too. Are you really using their full skill set? Are you providing continuous learning opportunities for them and training? Do you have them in jobs that are stretching them and challenging them to keep them engaged and applied? Are you listening to their suggestions in their work environments because they know best what needs done? So don't underestimate the capability of your current work staff. In today's world, retention is a top concern of most every organization. People are getting bored in their workplaces. They want a say in their schedule. They want variety in their work, and they want to know what's going on long term, that they're valued, to see where their work affects their output and the company's direction. And Lean works in line with that, which we'll get to in a future slide. But just know that in today's world, retention is critical. Valuing your employees and giving them a voice in identifying all of these waste, teaching them to see it and giving them the authority to minimize it over time can drastically change their work environment and work satisfaction. So that was a long definition of waste, because Lean in essence is waste reduction. I want to point out that Six Sigma is commonly put together with Lean, and they do go hand in hand, but Six Sigma by definition is variation reduction. So typically Lean is a precursor. You get your process lined out and sequenced to reduce the waste. What is left, you then look deeper into from a quantified analysis state and reduce variation. So the two go hand in hand, but Lean is usually a predecessor. So this, from the background of principles, is probably a good stopping point for questions.
I have a bunch, Mary, and if they can be answered briefly, feel free to give the quick answer. Don't feel an obligation to. But I have a comment to start. I was thinking of how this applies to me personally, and I'm a little embarrassed, but I was mowing the lawn yesterday, and I didn't used to do that. There was a kid in the neighborhood who used to mow. I just did all the landscaping, and I decided where the trees were and the bushes and the flowers and the berms and the decoration. And then the kid in the neighborhood mow, like super cheap. It was awesome. Well, he graduated, and he decided college was better than being my landscaper. So now I have to mow. And to make it worse, I bought a riding lawnmower. And now I'm mowing, and I'm realizing, why did I put these trees and bushes and berms where I put them? It's so horrible. It's the most inefficient process. Every time I'm mowing, I just think, I'm so glad Mary doesn't live near me if she saw what I'm doing. And I'm doing it fast because I'm riding a lawnmower. I've automated a process, made a process faster that shouldn't be the way it is. And there's no straight lines. It's so embarrassing. It's like, it's so much like how you talked about work at a company and 2 departments aren't talking. How could that possibly be? Well, I own the house and I wasn't talking to myself, and I've now created my own problem where it's super embarrassing. But this is a safe space. I wanted to admit that I'm seeing the waste, but I'm definitely not moving the landscaping. I'm not digging up a single tree. I'm just going to suffer through my inefficiency. All right. Question number uno is, in a previous slide, you talked about defining the goal or defining, before you start a project. extra time at the front end, you said, and are you defining the solution or are you defining the problem?
It definitely the solution, or definitely the problem. You may not know the solution. You should not know the solution, but you should have an idea of what level improvement you want to make. So it is a thorough explanation of the current state with background, context, understanding what is happening, why it is now undesirable, and how it got there. So basically what might have changed, what the impact of it is if it's left alone, and what the potential is if it's fixed. And if you don't know what that is, it's common to set yourself a goal of 50% better. So say it's a cycle time you're trying to reduce and you're not sure what you can do to resolve it, work towards half the time. So in some cases, you will know the solution, but if you know the solution, it's probably not a great lean project because it's probably so straightforward, you can just implement it. There should be unknowns, there should be analysis that needs to take place, but you definitely want to set an endpoint for yourself so that you have a line in the sand to define when you're done and to define what your measure of success is.
Next question, Mary. I'm going to paraphrase, and it has to do with global disruptions and this process and being lean and efficient during global disruptions. And it could have been climate or COVID or the Suez Canal tanker backing up global supply chains. So it's all inclusive. How do you handle that? Just in time and lean, super lean processes, but with these, how do you mitigate the potential, the real that there are global disruptions? And I think they referenced Toyota recently mentioned, clearly they originated TQM, that they are adjusting their processes to handle into these considerations around global disruptions to the supply chain.
Yes. So a lot of those are very hard to predict. You're not going to be able to prepare for every situation, especially those extremes, but you have to be flexible and you have to be adaptive. And those are some of the perks of being lean. You are much quicker to respond to changes when you have a lean environment. And overall, the lean rule is the less inventory, the better, but nothing is that straightforward. You're balancing your inventory with the time it takes to receive your goods as well as the time it takes to manufacture your finished projects, balanced with your order rates and usage rates. So there's constant analysis going on throughout your value stream. And by that, I mean from the beginning of ordering supplies to delivering product. Those timelines and potential risks and concerns within have to all be balanced and countered across. That's why it's so powerful to lay out that value stream and understand all of those relationships.
Next question. Mary, how to avoid a small improvement project that appears to help that process owner, but introduces more waste or variance at the whole system level or plant level?
Okay, so that's a great question, because another powerful element of lean is having cross-functional teams. And I say this because traditional organizations, if you ask for an org chart, any place you go, you always see that hierarchy in a vertical organization from the top level down, right? And lean tries to flatten that. So get away from departments and business groups that have competing objectives and get yourself to a horizontal view of all being aligned with the same objective of supplying that customer need. So when you do a project, you likely have an individual role represented who raised that potential project idea. So they are seeing it from their perspective. Part of the define phase, the first and most important phase, is getting context around that viewpoint to ensure that the action you take is beneficial in the long run across a larger perspective. So defining that scope, boundaries, and dependencies, and selecting the right team members that represent the roles upstream and downstream is critical to make sure you are going down the right path for the whole and not just for an individual. And I like to compare the map to, if you're taking a road trip, right? Do you need a map of the United States? Do you need a map of California? Or do you need a map of San Francisco? You can map at many different levels and you use that map to make decisions. But if you don't start high enough, you do run the risk of making decisions that benefit some and not all, or work in the wrong direction. So it's critical to start high and work down.
And here's a comment, but you might want to add to it around that this is inclusive. There's a lot of, we have inclusivity and diversity initiatives at all companies, and that this process is inclusive by nature. And then also that we're having to do a lot of environmental reporting and reporting on our initiatives. And that little box to the left, my left under waste, underutilized resources, you're wasting natural resources. So any comment on that these processes help other initiatives, complement other initiatives under either inclusivity or climate change and resource reduction?
Yes. So you'll see in a future slide, I typically recommend some strategy planning before any company undertakes a lean endeavor, because setting your decision criteria as a company is a necessary step to make decisions on what projects you do, where you spend your money, where you spend your resources, and who you engage. But more and more, those variables in your decision making, they're not just dollars, right? They're about recognition and reward of your employees. They're about customer satisfaction. They're environmental concerns, right? Social variables have become much more important than they were 20 years ago, and they should be, right? So how you set that criteria to make decisions as a company is usually done at a high level, and then your project selection and associated priorities will match that. And if you don't do that first, you run the risk of contradictions.
Well, I've got like 6 more questions, but I'm gonna hold them and any more that gather up until the end. And so maybe, keep that in mind, that for timing, we've got a little list. I'll hit you up, and a couple of them are good. They're a couple hard ones here. I'm looking forward to hitting you with that.
Good. Okay. Well, let's continue. So that was kind of the background of what lean is from a process improvement standpoint, what the principles are at a high level, and what the wastes are at a more detailed level. So I would say that's kind of the refresher course. Let's get into a few of the best practices here. And I know you touched on this one, Robert, in your example of cutting the grass, but I cannot stress this enough. I know we all want to jump to execute, right? We want to get in, we want to resolve things, we want to make everything better. We love all the talk about Industry 4.0 and automation. We're in the world of process automation, robotics, everything we can do around smart factories, and I am all for that. I'm not saying don't do that, but if you see here, that is the third step. You must simplify your process first, and after you simplify your process, which in doing that, that's basically step 2, setting your value stream together. You are basically defining what is in scope and what is not. You're getting rid of the waste that you can, and what is left, you're putting in the right sequence. You're making sure it's in working order. You're basically calibrating, setting your efficiencies, getting everything to function in an orderly way. From there, you move into standardization. Standardization is reducing some of that variation, getting one way, the best practice of doing things. It's setting your baseline, it's setting your expectation, it's used for training materials, it's incorporating the best that you can from a safety standpoint. So it's basically defining your requirements that you would then use to automate a system. If you jump to automation, I promise you it will be more costly. I promise you it will be more complex. And by saying that, I don't mean that's a one-time potential loss. I mean it's more complex long-term in the design, in the build, in the install, in the operation, and mostly for any changes and improvements you want to make going forward. Once you automate, you are much more fixed and less adaptive than you were in a prior state. So please ensure that what you're automating is what you truly want. So take the time to go through that simplify and standardize before you get to automation. And I don't want to knock AI here, but I do want to say this because I think it's worth stressing. AI is not smart. It is truly powerful, but it is basically used to move information from A to B. It can enable switches, it can do simple calculations, it can do a few things like that, but it is performing against the logic and rules that you defined in those prior steps. So you must know your requirements. You cannot expect it to make decisions for you that you haven't already made and informed it to do. So next best practice is in the area of leadership. And I'm going to give you a moment to read some of these before I go into them in detail. So take a moment. And I doubt any of these are new to you. So let me start off again, the premise of lean, right? The first principle was defining value from the eyes of the customer. Customer is always first, but people are a close second, right? Empowering your people is a basic principle of lean, and it comes long before any process. You can have the best process in the world, and it is not going to perform unless you have great people to run it as well. So lean has for decades and decades and decades talked about the difference of leadership versus management. And the way they define it is management is more like an authoritative power, right? It's a hierarchical role where you gain following out of obligation or duty. It's kind of a part of your work, right? It goes by words, directions, mandates. Leadership is much softer, right? If you flattened your company and you didn't have that authoritative power, would people still follow you, right? Do they respect you and your ideas and the direction you're going such that they want to be engaged and they want to align and they want to move in the same direction? So it's a shift, but it's a very, very powerful shift. It's driven by actions. And when I, as a consultant, would come into a new site, some of the things I like to do to understand how this is functioning is go shadow a meeting. If I enter a room and I don't know who anyone is, and I look around that conference room table or now our Zoom platform, and I see who's got the mic, basically, who is speaking the most. Is that the CEO level or is that the frontline worker? In a lean company, it's an even floor. It doesn't matter what your level is. You each have an equal voice. You each own your own workspace, and you are each empowered to make improvements and expected to make improvements in your area of ownership. And you are hired for your attitude and your will, your curiosity, your zest for continuous learning, and you're given the skill, the time, the space from your employee to continuously learn such that you continue to make improvements in your space. So that flat hierarchy where everyone pulls their own weight. Another way to look at a company is to go out and walk the floor, right? If I take the CEO on a walk along the floor or the CFO on a walk in a production environment or outside of their office in an office setting, is it going to be viewed as, uh-oh, what's wrong and why are they here? Or is it a common sighting and you're just, interested in the work that's going on and you're seeing what's happening there and you're offering help and support? So going to Gemba, going to the workforce should be a common practice no matter your level. Otherwise, you're not really aware of what you're seeing. If you're reading a report of data the month after, you're not getting the full story. As I promise you, what's happening is different than what's in your SOP, which is different than in your data after the fact. So you want to be engaged at all levels. You want everyone to be empowered. And again, I come back to this, you've probably heard the term resignation nation or the great resignation. Our workforce has been seriously disrupted in the past year and a half, right? The drivers we used to have to make changes in our careers and our work-life balance are very different than they were even 6 months ago. Many people, 4 million people quit in April, which was a record high. And it's a change in, do I need a second income? How do I value my time? Do I want to work in this field? It's not the same as, do I believe in my frontline manager and my coworkers? Those used to be the biggest variables for change, but now it's more that well-being, that balance, that stress reduction, the authority to have a say in my work schedule and my work environment. It's a safety concern. Does my company have the reputation in the environment, in the workspace that I also value in the same way? So we've got totally different dynamics going on, but the point I want to make is that the dynamics of recent times match the age-old philosophy of lean, right? It's people first, it's valuing a work culture that is kind to their employees, kind to their customers, and focused on continuous improvement. So let me jump, so I'm going to save us, let me go through this quickly. We could do another topic on this at some point because reporting is a huge realm, but I bring this to you because it should be familiar to everyone, and I just want to show a couple questions. If you digest this scoreboard in a couple seconds, can you answer these questions? Now, the answer should be yes, because we're all used to this, right? So it's 24/7 with 12 seconds to go in the fourth quarter. That's a very different answer than 24/7 in the beginning of the game. So the point of reporting I want to make is that there's rarely one metric that answers all your questions, but a few select can tell a story or paint a picture to give you the full breadth of what's happening. So I encourage you to think about your metrics that you're measuring, and it really should be a few. And this picture just tells you that what not to do. SQDC boards are common in the lean world. You'll see these in many work environments, but if I can't walk up to that as an outsider and understand in a couple minutes what's right, wrong, and indifferent, then there's too much information and it's not presented in a visual way that's actionable to me. Similarly, at your desk, look at all those piles of information or those electronic backups. You want to get away from that. And the goal is to follow a few best practices. I touched on this earlier with strategy planning early. That gives you the depth of your perspective. And then starting with your designs, not just your operations, gives you the breadth. Once you have that scope, you're looking for a few predictive KPIs. And by KPIs, I mean those key performance indicators that are a measurement over time. So by that, you need a target, you need a unit, you need an allowed range, and you need an action outside of those ranges. So it's understanding relationships of the few predictive elements. And then the countermeasures that you will take if those are out of range, and the triggers that signify when to act. I say single source of truth because it's common to have too much data, and I say data, not information. Over-reporting is a very common error, and oftentimes you will have two sets of data that contradict and you don't know which one is correct. This is also common in the realm of integrations, especially if you're going bi-directional. Which one is a race winner if they're both syncing at the same time? You've got to identify those to be able to trust your data because it should turn into meaningful information to inform your decisions. And another key flag is to not report by time or mass quantities of a large audience, but by need. If you're reporting information, it should be serving a purpose to the downstream user and informing their actions accordingly. If you're just doing something by month or by quarter, it's usually after the fact and not near as helpful. So I know my pace is probably not the best, but I want to allow a couple moments for questions. So this is a summary slide. Talks about our beginning background where we said lean is a continuous, incremental process improvement methodology for use in both operational and transactional environments. We talked about the need to simplify and standardize before you automate, the difference between leadership and management, and the power of giving your employees full say, training them to see waste and letting them influence their culture, and then using a select few KPIs for reporting to drive proactive behaviors and prevent issues before they become problems.
Mary, awesome job. I've got like 6 questions in 6 minutes, so this is perfect. You got 60 seconds apiece. I'm going to steal 10 seconds and just to affirm what you said. I love this quote. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all, by Peter Drucker. I think that's, we've all process automation projects that haven't been leaned first. You're just automating something that shouldn't be done at all.
Completely agree.
And then Mary, an unintended, but I think a really interesting wrinkle on one of your previous slides I never thought about is we all create reports, and we know inherently there are global variances, differences, cultural differences. There are folks on this call that probably don't watch American football. And so maybe I understood your slide in a second, but what a great point that there are people on this call who didn't. And we issue reports all the time. I have, 20 years of experience and 12 years of education of finance. Not everybody does. Something that's so obvious to me is not obvious to everyone else. So there's just a wrinkle on how important KPI presentations are. All right, question number 1 is, let's go with, where's B? Here we go. How do you align, we talked about the leadership slide, how do you, some suggestions around aligning Lean Six Sigma and corporate strategic goals? Or how important or not important that is?
It's very, very important. So your corporate goals have to be set first. I don't know if anyone has practiced the Hoshin Kamri method of strategy planning, but it's another lean tool, and it's a very simplistic single page view of a strategy plan. It goes from your mission and value into your breakthrough objectives 3 to 5 years out, which lends to your annual objectives, which lend to your projects. And projects are typically in terms of months. And it's always evolving, so it's always accurate, real time, and it aligns your people to know what projects they're working on and how those impact the larger objectives so they can see their direct link. And it makes sure that your company vision aligns with the lowest level of your active projects. And that is really, really important to do, because otherwise you will have competing objectives.
I got several smarty pants comments in there that did it take me 12 years to graduate with an undergraduate in finance? No. Question number 2, it has to do with the ROI calculations. And the comment question is, often there's no cash change. There's a calculation of non-value added time that's reduced, and that there's an assumption that it's replaced with value added time. Is that the correct way to calculate the improvement? Should it be cash change, or should it be non-value added to value added? Thoughts?
So that differs in different companies. The more mature the company is, the more they value the non-dollar savings. So there's typically hard savings and cost savings. Hard savings will be your labor savings and your material costs. The soft savings will be, just as you said, replacing non-value added activities and opening up that capacity to then be filled with value activities. Now, if you don't have additional work to take that time that you have freed up, you may have a problem, but I've rarely ever found that to be the case. And the more soft savings you make, the more they build and eventually turn into hard savings.
Mary, any best practices or ranges around what's the expected time to value for lean activities? Short-term expectations run into conflict with sometimes the extensive need to pursue these projects, simplify, standardize, and automate. How to best handle that?
So I'm a proponent of starting small and keeping it simple. I don't think a lean undertaking requires a significant investment or a significant amount of time. You can start with a single project and a small team of 6 to 8 people, and you can train them as you go if you have a decent coach. This does not need to be a significant undertaking. It's best if you pick a small project with a good chance of success and show the benefits. Then you raise awareness and build the momentum and get the support you need to grow and expand from there. If you're looking for a top-down buy-in at a large level in order to get started, you're unlikely to ever get started. You can start small from the bottom up with some top support and prove your worth and grow from there.
And last question around change management. Any tips on handling the people side of change when trying to implement or initiate these ideas?
That one could be a topic of its own. The people side of things is bigger than the process side. We talk about this as process improvement, but honestly, the people side is a stronger, more powerful and more concerning at times effort. You have to have people on board with the right attitudes and mindset before you can make any changes. So going back to ADKAR, I'm a huge proponent of that as well, right? Awareness, desire, knowledge before ability with constant reinforcement.
Mary, perfectly done with an exact in time. That's
Amazing.
that was efficient. We eliminated waste.
We did.
Excellent job. And I will follow up with Mary's contact information if anybody has questions or needs a coach counsel while they are on this lean journey, Lean Six Sigma journey. So well done, Mary. This was fantastic. And thank you very much. And thank you to all the members for participating. Like, comment, share my content on LinkedIn, and you could win cool Global CFO Council swag. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me.